welcome everyone to the fourth Sitecore User Group Germany Special Lunch of 2024. It has been just about 2 months since Sitecore's Symposium 2024 took place in Nashville, and one of the hot topics caused a lot of attention. And no, I'm not talking about Sitecore Stream, and no, I'm also not talking about the Sitecore Marketplace, but I'm talking about the .NET Core SDK and the .NET Core Starter Kit for XM Cloud. So warm welcome to Rob, who is the creator of the .NET Core Starter Kit and was also heavily involved in the SDK recreation. So I don't want to hold you off any longer. Stage is yours, Rob.
Thanks, Sebastian. So as Sebastian said, I'm going to be giving an introduction to a new SDK that we've been building here, basically allowing you to build with ASP.NET Core and XM Cloud. Hopefully, as we go through it, though, some of you will realize it's not that new after all. So, my name's Rob Earlam. I've been working with Sitecore for 9 years now in a variety of different roles, currently leading our developer advocacy activities, trying to basically make changes to help ensure that every developer using the platform's as successful as they can be. We've got a bunch of social links on the screen here, so if anyone wants to get in touch afterwards, feel free to give me a shout. So I'm going to start, first of all, by taking a look back, basically at the history of building with Sitecore, kind of seeing where we've come from. And if we look back, like right back to the beginning, Sitecore launched back in 2001. I'm actually going to jump forward a little bit to 2005, and there's a good reason for that. That's kind of when Sitecore started to really take off and get a lot of traction on the global stage. It's also when my journey with Sitecore started. I was a junior developer out of university, and the partner I ended up working for in Manchester sent me on Sitecore training for version 5, and that was my first taste of the Sitecore life. Throughout that whole time period, though, like .NET's basically been the primary development source for Sitecore. If you're working on XM and XP, that's still probably the case as well. In 2018, though, we took things in a new direction, and that was with the release of JSS. For the first time, you could build a site using JavaScript only on the front end. So you didn't need to basically use .NET to actually build your front end experience. 2020 came along, and that was our initial launch of the ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK. This was originally built for XM and XP, and basically brought that headless delivery model back to the .NET world for the first time. Then in 2022, we launched XM Cloud, and this was headless only. Now, while it's been possible to build sites using the existing ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK, the process hasn't been that smooth, and it hasn't been kept up to date with the latest developments on the platform. The Next.js SDK realistically is the only SDK currently which has the full feature compatibility with the platform. We do have Angular along the way, but again, that wasn't available at first. It was pretty much only Next.js was your main option. Really, though, the thing I like about this diagram is it shows that Sitecore has a rich history with .NET. XM Cloud was really the outlier here. That's the first product we released which wasn't .NET primary, with JavaScript being the leading language there. So what we've basically been working on in the past month is a refactor of that ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK to bring that up to date, basically up to date into the XM Cloud world, and also for XM and XP. So I want to basically talk about what's changed, what's stayed the same, where we are today, and what's coming down the pipe for the SDK. Well, the first thing you might notice is, well, the first thing I've mentioned basically is that this is a refactor. It's a refactor of the existing ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK. You'll notice as well that we've dropped the word name rendering out of the name of it, the word out of the name. Firstly, it didn't really add too much to the actual description of what the SDK did, because it actually does more than just rendering. It also made it clear that this isn't just like a V2. We are making breaking changes as we change this SDK over and bring it up to date. So if you're using the existing one today, the migration process shouldn't be too difficult, but there will be migration work involved. There will be some things you have to change. It's currently in alpha release, I think we're calling it. So the SDK is available on GitHub. You can go and download it today. The packages are all published to NuGet as well. So if you want to start building with it, it's there ready for you to go. We also have an XM Cloud starter kit today as well, also in GitHub, also fully available, open source. I have touched a little bit on the fact that the SDK is also available for XM and XP. I'm not really going to talk too much about that today. I'm definitely going to focus on the XM Cloud side, but it is available for XM and XP and platform development as well. Another thing that I like to highlight with this is all being done open source. And it's basically part of Sitecore's renewed focus on open source, really. Both the SDK and the starter kit are available on GitHub, and we really want to receive community contributions for this. So that could be in the form of opening issues if you find something wrong with either of the projects, submitting PRs if you want to work on any of the issues that you open. And we've also opened up the discussion feature on both. And I don't think that's something we've used too much at Sitecore before, but if you just want to have a general conversation about why something's implemented a certain way or the best way to leverage the SDK on a problem you have, please open up a discussion on there. We'll be happy to talk about how people are using the applications themselves. We really want to do more with open source in Sitecore though, because it helps us stay connected with what the community want. And that feedback we get will also help us decide where to take the SDK and the starter kit, basically where we're taking it forward and where to take it next. So who would use this SDK? This is kind of one of the common questions that we get. And there's a couple of use cases that we've been thinking about. One of the main common ones we hear is customers and partners with an existing in-house .NET development team. If we think back to that first slide I showed, Sitecore have a rich history with .NET throughout that time frame. But we've got customers and partners who've been with us on long journeys throughout those years, and they've built up big teams of .NET in-house development skill. So when we launched XM Cloud and it was JavaScript only, Next.js only really, they were kind of left with a choice. Do you retrain your existing .NET developers over to Next.js, which isn't always a perfect answer? Some developers might not want to go and learn a new language. There's also the fact that that's going to take a time period. You've got to invest in that time to get experience with the language. Also, the other option is you could hire .NET developers, hire Next.js developers. Again, there's drawbacks to that as well. There's a cost involved. So we've been really hearing that the community want to have an official .NET approach for XM Cloud development. Another one is if you have an existing ASP.NET Core application and you want to add CMS functionality to it, the SDK is all implemented via middleware. So it basically means that you can just you can add the middleware easily into your existing application. Then you can decorate the MVC routes that you want to be CMS managed. So it means you don't have to hand over the entire app to Sitecore. You can just selectively sprinkle the CMS throughout the application at the points where you need content management functionality. Another one we've heard quite a lot is customers with stricter data hosting or vendor selection requirements. If you think of industries or customers who work in industries like finance, healthcare, things where there are really strong and tight regulatory requirements they have to adhere to. So things like that, they may not be able to sign on with someone like Vercel or Netlify, or if they can, it can be quite a long and tedious process to get vendor approval. And a lot of those customers already have approval for things like Azure. In this scenario, basically, if you're not using Netlify or Vercel, it kind of reduces a lot of the benefit you get out of Next.js, because a lot of that functionality is actually provided by the hosting platform and not the SDK itself. So in that scenario, building with ASP.NET Core may actually be a better choice for those customers and partners. So let's take a look under the hood at how it all works. So you have XM Cloud with its inbuilt edge delivery. That's basically our globally scaled edge platform, which takes all your content and scales it around the globe. But XM Cloud's headless. So what you need to do is you need to deploy different instances of your heads for the different regions that you're going to be working in. And each of those instances pulls its data from XM Cloud to basically create the experiences that you're building for your customer. But what I want to do is basically dig into one of those applications and how it communicates with Edge. So you start off by having XM Cloud, and it has all of the different editing interfaces that you provide in there. So we have things like sites, we have pages, we have components, and for once we've named them pretty sensibly. It's good. So you go in there and you create your sites if you're a multi-site instance. Within each of your sites, you create your pages that are used to render your content. And we also have components that can be used to build out simple components that are marketer controlled. The marketer goes through, works with all of these, and then when they are happy and they're finished, they publish it all out. And as I said, that's all stored in Experience Edge, our globally scaled platform. So that's basically everything on the XM Cloud side of the platform. What we have then is we have these applications that come along built with the ASP.NET Core Rendering SDK. Oh, sorry, the ASP.NET Core SDK. That has a bunch of different kind of layers in there. And the first one of those is the GraphQL client. So when you select a route that is selected to be managed by Sitecore, the GraphQL client will make a layout request to Edge, and then that receives the full layout for that page in basically a giant wall of JSON that gets returned back from Edge. We then take that JSON response, and that's passed through our model binding layer, and that converts all that JSON into strongly typed C# objects. Then those models are passed into the views, and there's a bunch of tag helpers in there, which basically render those different fields that you've made CMS managed into the page. So I'm going to dig a little bit more into the model binding and the tag helping functionality, because that's where most of the functionality exists. So if we think about a promo component, pretty common thing we've all built before, you'd probably have something like an image to make it nice and engaging. You'd have some text in there to explain what the promotion's for. There's like a link as well, which is going to be where you're going to send the user to. And that's exactly what you can see on the screen here. This is a model for a promo component. And you can see, really, you're just building dumb POCOs. They're really, really simple. You'll notice each of the fields has an attribute on there. And that's used to basically tell the SDK where in that giant wall of JSON that gets returned from Edge, where in that JSON that individual field's value is going to pluck it from and populate that object with. Anyone who's worked with things like Newtonsoft.json, system text JSON, things like that, this kind of model of working with is going to be really familiar. Next up, we have the tag helpers. And if we stick with the same example, you can see we have the same promo component we're working with here. If you look at the top of the view, you can see we have the promo model defined there. And it's just passed in as a dumb POCO. There's no generics wrapping it, nothing fancy going on. It's all just standard ASP.NET Core functionality. Below that, you can see the markup that renders out this model. And you can see we have the tag helpers being used there. First up is the SC image for the promo image. Then we have the SC text tag helper for the text, and SC link for the link. You might ask, why do we use these tag helpers and not just, a standard anchor for the link or an IMG tag for the image? And that's because of the editing compatibility. So when you build with an SDK like this, what that does is it makes it pages aware. So pages, as I mentioned before, is the editing interface in XM Cloud, where your marketers can go and change an image, change the text, change the link. Using the tag helpers here basically tells pages how to wire up that editing functionality and makes it content manageable. You can see a list as well on the left of all the different tag helpers that we have, and it's the same for all of those. So it's probably time we take a look at this in action. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically go and create a new repository based on the ASP.NET Core SDK. I did record this demo a couple of months ago now, just before Symposium when this was originally run. So some of the XM Cloud UIs have changed a little bit since then, but you should be able to get the hang of it. So this is a template repository. This is the XM Cloud.NET Starter Kit. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new repository based on it in my personal GitHub account. We're going to use the name ASP.NET Core Symposium 2024, and we'll use that name throughout. And we'll leave it public. So I think if you go to my repo, my organization, my account in GitHub, I think it's still there today. Once it's gone and created that repository, we're going to hop over to the deploy app in XM Cloud. But once we're in there, we're going to create a project based on this repo. So this is where we're going to do our initial XM Cloud provisioning. So we use the create project button. And again, we're going to keep the naming consistent here. So we'll paste that same value in. Go over and we'll connect it to my GitHub account where I just created that repository. Once you go in, you choose the account you want to use, and then you can go and search for the repository you created. Been on GitHub quite a long time, so I've got quite a few repositories, so luckily it does allow you to search. We need to use the use your own code flow currently for the ASP.NET Core SDK. We're working on getting it implemented as the template, so you'll be able to choose between Next.js and ASP.NET Core, but it works just the same through the bring your own repo flow. We call our environment testing. We're just doing this for a demo. And we'll set it to auto deploy whenever we push a change into the repository. Now, once you click start deployment, this will go away and it'll run the deployment for you. I wish it was this fast in real life, obviously, but obviously I sped that up a little bit for the demo here. You can see on screen, I think it took about 6 minutes, just over, for this deployment to complete. Any subsequent deployments would be faster because you wouldn't have to do that provisioning step anymore. So you're going to save about 2.5 minutes off that time. So still about 4 minutes per deployment is pretty good, I think. Okay, so we've created our environment, our project now. Next up, what we need to do is go and create our site. So we don't have any sites in here yet. All we have is an empty environment. So to do that first, I'm going to use the breadcrumb, and I'm going to go back to the environment I just created. We can see the deployment that we just did, but I'm going to go to the sites tab, and obviously it's going to tell me I don't have any sites because we don't have any created yet. So I'm going to use the create your first site button, which will take us into the sites app. From here, you get a choice of what sites you want to create. And you can either choose the empty site or the skate park. If you're starting a project from scratch, you'd choose the empty site because that's going to give you the blank canvas that you can work with. For this demo, though, we'll choose the skate park because it's a bit more entertaining than just creating a blank site with no content in there. So we go and click on it, and it'll tell us a little bit about what features you get in there. After you've reviewed it and you're happy, you go and you complete some details. So we're going to go in here, and we'll use the same values as well before. We like consistency. We're going to create a new site collection. If you're a brand who has multiple sites, you may want to group your different sites into different site collections. For this, we'll just create a new one. And once we click create, it'll go away and it'll provision our site for us. That basically goes and creates a load of items in the content tree, which powers all of this. Again, I sped that up a little bit for the sake of the demo. I think it took about 2 minutes in total for it to complete, if you were waiting for it yourself. Okay, so next up, what we need to do is get my local developer machine working. So I need to basically get my dev machine to connect to that environment and allow me to basically start being productive as a developer. So to do that, we're going to go and clone that repo we just created down to my dev machine. So we're going to go back to GitHub, and we'll copy the SSH command, and then we'll go over to the terminal, paste the command into there, and that base is going to bring that code base down to my local machine. Once we've copied that down, we're going to open it in VS Code, Visual Studio. And then what we need to do is tell this application how to connect to that instance. And we do that through the app settings. So you could populate it directly. That's not best practice. We're going to create an app settings.development.json, and then we're going to get some values to tell it how to connect. We need the context ID, the site name, and the editing secret. And you can see these are all provided and empty and ready to go. So what we need to do is we need to go over back to the deploy app, and that allows us to get that data. If you go over to the developer settings page, you can see here that those 3 values are provided for us. So it's made really easy. So we can go and copy each of those values, and we're going to go and paste them into our app settings.development.json. Once I've done that, I'm going to hit F5 and run the application. Before I do it, though, I'm actually going to enable a dev tunnel, which will basically allow pages to connect down to my local instance. So I can run pages connecting to my local developer instance. And I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, about why we have to do the dev tunnel currently. That basically allows us to get the WYSIWYG editing experience as a developer without having to deploy the app as well. So here you can see we have hit F5, we've got the app running locally, and this is the skate park. You can see it running locally on my machine. All I have is the head running. It's connecting through to the XM Cloud instance that I just created to pull down all of that data. So the last thing we're going to do is actually show pages being connected. So to do that, if you look at this page here, those 2 panels you see, that's actually the promo component we talked about before. You can see the image, you can see the text. The link actually wasn't populated, which is why it isn't rendered out. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect pages up, and then you can see how this will look in the editing interface. So to do that, I'm going to copy the domain, which I used here, which is the dev tunnel that was created in Visual Studio. And we're going to hop back to XM Cloud, and we're going to open the dashboard. And this is where the UI is slightly different because I'm going to load the content editor. It's actually in the top menu now, how you'd access it. But we're going to do this, and we're going to go down, and we're going to set up the rendering definition. And this basically sets up a rendering item per site, which tells pages where to connect to its editing instance. We're going to go into here. We're just going to paste in that dev tunnel domain over these values, basically telling pages that when you load, connect to this URL instead to power the editing experience. So we save that. We're going to hop back to the main XM Cloud dashboard, and then we'll click on the site, and that should bring up pages with our site running from my dev machine. and actually bring up the site in like an editing version of the site. So you can go and click on the fields and do all your content management activities. I'm going to make it a little larger first. You can see you can have different breakpoints you can view. But now if you see, as I hover over those promo components, you can see that you get the content management Chrome's rendering. So if I click on the image, then the panel on the right will update, and that'll allow me to go and select a different image out of my media library. I can go and overtype the text if I wanted to, and I could go and populate the link and basically do all of the different content management activities that marketers do. And this is basically what I was talking about with the tag helpers. So if I just rendered an IMG tag or just rendered an anchor tag, those fields wouldn't be editable in Pages. That's why you use the tag helpers instead, to enable this WYSIWYG style editing functionality. Okay, so I'm going to finish up by talking about some considerations that you might want to think about whether you're choosing whether to build with the ASP.NET Core SDK. The first key one, I think I've mentioned it a few times now, this is a pre-release. We're working towards a version 1. We've called it an alpha release so far. If you need every single XM Cloud feature today, this probably isn't for you. A good example of this is the fact that I had to use the dev tunnel to basically connect via the rendering host item. I'm currently in the process of building metadata editing into the SDK. So when that's completed, you won't have to do any of that anymore. That's built into JSS now as of version 22.1, I think it was. So you basically just be able to load pages, select a drop down, and then just go to localhost 5001, and your developers will be able to work themselves against their local instances without having to edit the content tree. There's a few other things as well, other features that we're still working on. If you go and check out the SDK repository and the starter kit repository, you can see the open issues there. So we're being fully transparent on what is and isn't available today. The next thing is static site generation versus server-side rendering. Again, you're most likely going to be comparing this with Next.js when you're making the decision. Next.js does both. It will handle static site generation and server-side rendering. The ASP.NET Core, by its nature, is only server-side rendered. It's not a SSG-powered language. I don't see that as a positive or a negative. It's just a fact. Really, it depends on what your requirements are. It depends on how much traffic you're going to be serving. It depends on where and how you're going to be hosting the head. Just something for you to consider, really, whether that will make an effect on your decision of which SDK to choose. Edge rate limiting is kind of tied in with that. We currently have a request limit on Edge of 80 requests a second. So obviously, if you're doing static site generation, that can help alleviate that pressure. Whereas server-side rendering, if you have a site that's high traffic, or maybe really peaky traffic, if you have sites serving things like Black Friday or Cyber Monday content, that could present issues. When I presented this at Symposium, I had Ivan in the audience who owns Edge, and he pointed out that 80 requests a second is actually only non-cached hits, which I didn't realize. So when an item is requested and cached, it will no longer, cached on Edge, that is, it'll no longer count towards that 80 requests a second. It's only full requests back to origin that counts. So again, something you've just got to consider when you're picking the SDK for your implementation. Another common question we get is, what about Blazor? What about Maui? The answer is not yet. That's kind of what I'm telling people. If you think back to the SDK image I had before with the 3 layers, you could actually reuse the GraphQL layer and the model binding layer, and that'd work really well. So at that point, you've got a strongly typed, basically layout definition. All you'd have to do is basically build the Maui or the Blazor layer, like we have the ASP.NET Core layer. So hopefully not too much effort. Well, not as much effort as compared to building a whole SDK. Who knows? Maybe someone wants to do it towards an MVP contribution. That'd be amazing. Okay, this is probably my favorite slide of the session, though. We want your feedback. Basically, myself and Ivan Leakins are the 2 people building this. He's kind of leading the SDK development. I'm leading the starter kit development. We want your feedback, though. So please, you can use the QR codes there, but they basically go to the URL below. If you see an issue with either repository, please raise it as an issue on the repo. If you see any open issues and you want to work on one and contribute back, that'd be fantastic. As I said, we have discussions open there if you just want to ask us questions about the 2, about any future direction or anything. And we want to hear from everyone. How are you using the SDK? help us make it better. Basically, that's what we're after. And that's kind of everything I had to present today. Any questions? I could see a few pinging through in the chat as I was presenting, so I don't know if some have been answered already.
Yeah, some have been answered, but I think there is one open question. And for everyone else, I mean, paste your questions in the chat or just raise your hand here in Teams virtually, and we go through them one by one. And maybe starting with Goran's question, when will it be a real release, go live release, Rob? Do you know that?
When me and Ivan finish building it. We're trying to get it done as fast as we can. We're saying people can use it today. It depends on what features are missing and what you require. The two big ones probably are metadata editing from a dev experience perspective and embedded personalization from the marketer perspective. I'm building metadata, Ivan's building embedded personalization. Currently, we're both in progress on both of those. Hopefully, shouldn't take too much longer. Forms is probably the other big one that we don't have currently. But you know, if you have a customer who maybe doesn't need to wait for forms, they could build on it today. Once forms is introduced in the SDK, all you'll have to do is pull down the latest SDK from NuGet, the latest package update, and then you'll get the functionality. So we don't have a set time frame, unfortunately. But yeah, we're just going to keep pushing features out, and hopefully people use it along the way.
There is a question on from Christian Handel. Any limitations on components?
Components as in the components app or the components you build? So we don't have support for components, the XM Cloud application yet. That's coming. That's why we don't have form support. So components is used to power forms behind the scenes, basically. Yeah, so again, that's another thing we have in the backlog. Yeah.
What about going cross-platform, since modern.NET is platform agnostic, not Windows only?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like that's the advantage of this. You could run this on a Mac, on Linux, anywhere that the .NET runtime runs, you'd be able to host this. So it's much more liberating, yeah. And that also ties in with the whole Fed-first development changes that we made recently for XM Cloud. So that then you can truly be cross-platform, have your developers run on any kind of operating system they want, where .NET's supported.
Another question. What would be the biggest difference for the developer when targeting XP instead of XM Cloud?
Honestly, not that much, really. There's going to be different NuGet packages you include. So you'd include the experience editor package instead of the pages package that I'm building now. You would probably, so it depends also whether you're using Experience Edge. So then when you have the concept of the context ID, actually I think context ID is just XM Cloud, isn't it? Yeah. So I think it's probably just going to be whether you're picking between pages and Experience Editor. Yeah, the actual development approach is going to be very, very similar because it's all just layout data at the end of the day. So it's the actual structure of the data and everything's all the same. There's not too many differences.
So how would you host it? Question from Goran.
So we are, well, to give you a bit of background, the MVP, Sitecore's MVP site, so that's mvp.sitecore.com. That's built on the ASP.NET Rendering SDK, the old version. We're about to kick off a project to migrate it to the new ASP.NET Rendering SDK. It's currently hosted in an Azure web app. I'm anticipating we'll probably keep it in an Azure web app. Simple, does the job. You don't need to overcomplicate these things. If you're on XM and XP, you may be running in Kubernetes, then again, you could just run it as a container in Kubernetes as well. Just try and keep things simple though, really. XM Cloud, it's a bit of overkill for that, really.
There is one from Danny. Go ahead.
So what if you have an existing XP platform and you want to build a new website in this? So just one website to build for this. Is that not using too much of this, yeah? Since that will be JSS.
It depends on your existing setup and how you're trying to build it. But if you're building a brand new site from scratch, you'd have a multi-site instance in XM and XP, and you could just have your one site built using the ASP.NET Core SDK for sure. In the same way you could have, all our multi-sites are kind of, if you're building headlessly, it's technology agnostic. Yeah, so you could have, a site on Next.js, you could have a site on Angular, you could have another site on ASP.NET Core. It's use the best technology for the job, really.
And then you will still use the SDK if you want to connect to XP, to an existing instance on XP?
I'd recommend it, yeah, because then you get all the functionality that we've kind of been talking about here. You get all the model binding provided, all the tag helpers, all the GraphQL layers all built out for you. You know, if you tried to do it yourself, it'd be possible, but you'd just basically be recreating the SDK yourself at that point. Yeah, let us save you some time.
Thank you.
Is the SDK covered by the Sitecore support, or is it just GitHub issues?
Good question. So if you have a support, if you have a support agreement, your customer, you could definitely use Sitecore support for sure. That's what they're there for. Behind the scenes, if you log a ticket, it'll probably get routed to myself and Ivan. If it's an urgent issue, then I definitely go through support, because then you got the option to escalate and things like that. If you've noticed something which isn't, it's not affecting your live site, it's just a small bug you've noticed, feel free to log an issue directly on the repositories themselves. Though, yeah, depends on what the issue is itself.
Another question coming in: can we mix sites in XM Cloud, say 2 Next.js websites and 2 ASP.NET Core sites?
Yeah, we have that today. If you check out the XM Cloud introduction repo, we've got 5 Next.js, I think, in there, and 1 on the ASP.NET Core SDK, which is the MVP site, which we're going to migrate over. So yeah, you can completely mix and match whichever technology works best. I would say that doing that can complicate your hosting a little bit. You know, we have our 5 Next.js sites in Vercel. We have our 1 ASP.NET Core site in Azure. It's fine, but it does add an extra layer of kind of complexity around deployments and things you got to think about.
Thanks a lot, Rob. And yeah, thanks for showing up. I hope this was helpful for everyone. Watch out for the next sessions. It's not yet planned, but if you have a topic, if you want to share something, get in touch with me, and we can find a date where you present to the audience. And that would also play well for the next MVP applications, I would say. So it's good to start early. So yeah, have a great time. Have great holidays coming up, and see you next time.